Hi everyone, my name is Taylor. I'm 23 and this was my Jeep. I bought it when I was 15 years old. I've had it ever since. It was my first car and I just could not get rid of it. I got Jeep fever.
So what model CJ is this?
So this is a 1980 Jeep CJ7. A little bit, quite a lot of modifications to it. Custom rear differential that we built at the shop. The front end is out of a 1986 CJ7 and the drivetrain is a Chevy 383 stroker with a turbo 400 behind it. And then of course the tried and true Dana 300 behind that as well with a twin stick shifter.
So you're saying you work at a shop. You work at a shop local to Daytona, Florida?
I do indeed. So I work at the Toy Box Jeeps in Holly Hill, Florida. We specialize in CJs and also early Willys. We'll also work on TJs, but JKs is kind of where we do the cutoff line. But a lot of what we do is just tearing them down to a bare frame, rebuilding the differentials and starting over again.
All right, so let's get right into it. Let's pop the hood and let's show you what's under this Jeep. So making our way under the hood here, Taylor is going to discuss about what's under the hood of this 1980 CJ.
All right, so under the hood we have a Blueprint Engines 383. It's not a seasoned block, it's a brand new manufactured block. I believe they're actually cast in-house at Blueprint Engines in Ohio. Same goes for the cylinder heads and the intake manifold. The carburetor is a Holley 750. And it's a 4160 part number, and I love that carburetor. It's ran phenomenal. I did mess around with an Edelbrock setup for a while, but I just ended up coming right back to the Holley because nothing ran quite as good. A little bit more complicated, more to leak, but I just preferred the way it was set up. The brake system is actually from an 87 Wrangler YJ as well, because the tub is a Wrangler. And that's a cool system. It works pretty well, although the one thing that I don't like about it is a little bit of a low pedal syndrome, but I'm going to be swapping some boosters out and see if that does anything for me. I of course do have air conditioning here, and I also have a Champion Radiators 4-row aluminum radiator to keep this thing cool, as well as a, I believe, Cyclone air fan. As much as I could, I had to keep the air flowing as well as possible, because with the previous setup I did have some overheating problems, but now with this setup and a flow cool water pump, it keeps itself running 180, 190, absolutely maximum.
So do you like the electric fan versus the mechanical fan?
I do, but there were quite a bit of a learning curve with that. In the beginning I was running too small of a gauge of wire, and it was actually frying relays and burning out all of the electrical sockets. But once I switched over to a higher gauge wire, or a lower gauge wire I should say, I didn't really have any more problems with that. And I still keep 10 relays in the glove box just in case.
So is that a HEI distributor?
Yes, it is. That's a MSD distributor, and that came with the motor because this was a turnkey setup. The only thing I reused from my old setup was the headers, and those were Summit Racing block hookers.
Okay. So that's pretty much under the engine bay here. What transmission are you running in this thing?
All right, so originally I had a 355 and I had a 700 R4, but when I went to the 383, the 700 R4 was just not going to hold up to the abuse. So I ended up going with a turbo 400. If I'm not mistaken, this is one of the straight cut gears, so this is a little bit of a beefier transmission. And I could have gone with the 700 and seen how well it would last, but I wanted something that could take the abuse and would get me on the road quickly.
Alright, so as far as gear ratio wise, do you like the transmission?
I do like the turbo 400. The only thing I missed from the 700 R4 is definitely going to be that slightly lower first gear ratio. But when I went to the swap from the 355 to the 383, the difference in the torque pretty much made that up for me.
Okay. So what transfer case are you running behind the 400?
The transfer case is a Dana 300, tried and true, again out of a 1986 CJ7. It leaks like every other Dana 300 no matter what you do to them. That's the only leak I got.
Hey, if that's the only leak you got, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah, but they are stout. I've actually never seen one completely come apart. I've heard them make noise, but I've never seen one fail. And then obviously it was just, I've considered going to a lower gear ratio with the Dana 300, but being that it's a street queen, I've held off for now.
So let's talk about your steering and front axle setup. What do you got going on under here?
So the front axle is out of a 1986 CJ7. I got the Dana Spicer licensed diff cover there. I love that thing. The only difference that I did run into, if you guys plan on doing a swap like that, is that those two ribs on the front of the cover do interfere with the steering stabilizer, even with an aftermarket. So you're going to have to do a little bit of modification to make that clear. But once you've done that, you're totally clear and good to go. And then the rest is just completely stock CJ7 tie rod ends and the this typical wide track setup on here. And then the front springs are actually, they are soft ride springs, and they came from, it's escaping me now, but I'll think of it.
Alright, so your spring setup, What size lift?
2.5.
Springs. 2.5.
2.5. And the rear is Pro Comp. I just can't quite remember what the front springs are now, but I'll give you that information.
All right, so 2.5-inch lift on this thing. Tires, what kind of tires you running? Wheels and tires.
So those are 32 by 1250s actually.
Okay.
So they're just wide enough to where they'll rub if I just ever so slightly touch on the wheel too hard. Or I'm sorry, 33 1250s.
33s, okay. Is that a 15 by 10 or?
Yes, they are. Yep.
Okay, 15 by 10 wheels.
Yep, and they do rub just a little bit, but a little bit of shaving on the fender flares solved that problem.
I think it's a great setup, especially with a 383. I'd say it scoots.
Thank you. It does.
So the rear axle, Dana 44.
Yep, the rear axle is a Dana 44 out of a 1977 International Scout, and again we've got the Dana Spicer diff covers. You go from a 10-inch brake setup to an 11-inch brake setup, so you get a little bit more braking out of it. I was very close to going with the disc brake setup, but I didn't want to get into messing with the proportioning valve too much. And by keeping the drum brakes, I was able to keep everything essentially stock. And when we rebuilt it, we didn't end up cutting it, but we did end up having to move the axle perches just a little bit inwards so that it would obviously meet with the factory spring location.
So locker-wise, oh, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine.
Locker-wise, do you have lockers in the rear or the front?
I do not have a locker. I do have a Detroit True Track limited slip that we put in the rear end when we did it, and then we obviously re-bearinged everything, and the passenger side axle is actually new as of 2 weeks ago because Jeep.
Because Jeep. That's a good answer on that one.
Yep.
I mean, you don't know why stuff does it, it's just a Jeep thing.
No, there are things that just go wrong that shouldn't go wrong, and you just...
Now what gears did you say were in this?
373s, front and back.
373, all right.
Yep. The front's still an open carrier. I'm considering a locker, but I haven't gone that route just yet. And then about 6 months ago, I actually found a 21-gallon factory tank and did that swap as well. And that skid plate was actually custom built by a gentleman who unfortunately isn't with us anymore, but he had excellent fabrication skills, and that skid fits awesome.
So what about the exhaust? Anything special with the exhaust?
Nope, nothing too special, just Flowmasters. I believe they're Super 10s. They're 2 5/8 pipe. I tried to get the exhaust shop to go with 3, but it just would not clear around the transfer case. So that was about as big as we could go with the setup.
So I'm sure people are probably dying to hear this thing. Why don't you hop in it a minute and
Absolutely.
give it a little bit of music to the ears. That's good. Alright, so now we're going to work our way on to the interior of this Jeep. Taylor, tell us a little bit about what you've done to the interior.
Alright, so the interior is, I wanted to keep that classic vibe, but I wanted to also update things where I could without absolutely destroying the factory dash and the look of a CJ. So what I did is I went with the speed hut gauges, very similar to what you have. It was only about a 2.5-month wait period, but it was absolutely worth it. And Speed has been absolutely phenomenal with any assistance that we needed setting it up or wiring it up. They were quick to find any solutions that we needed. I had those made, and I went with kind of a factory style, but at night they light up blue and red to kind of match the Chevy engine and the blue paint job. And then the main thing that people laugh about it and they make fun of me for it, but I wanted my AC. So I put my AC in here, and I do like it. I'm still trying to get it quite figured out with the 383 because it has a little bit of a lopey idle. So I'm working on setting up an idle stop solenoid. That way when I kick the air on, the idle will come up a little more, because right now you kick that air on when you're sitting there in gear, it's going to lope like crazy, which sounds good, but it's not that fun in the heat. And then I went ahead and I added my smoker's package here and the fire missiles button, because everybody needs one of those.
The smoker's package. So what gauge you got over there?
Just another temp gauge, just to keep my ease of mind, because again, with the previous motor I had some overheating problems. Especially at night, it's nice to be able to just quickly glance down and see this. If you guys own a CJ, you'll know that when you're driving down the road at night and you're looking at that gauge at an angle, it kind of gives you like the false sense of that it's running a little hotter when you're looking at it from that direction. So just having the gauge right here, right in front of me, is just another level of security, so I don't have to worry about this thing running too hot.
All right, so I noticed your steering wheel. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yep, so that's a Grant steering wheel. I actually bought it because I had a friend named Grant that actually passed away a few years ago, and I wanted to put something that reminded me of him every time that I drove it. So that was the deal with the steering wheel there. And the column was actually built in-house by a good friend of mine, Greg, and he rebuilds these at the shop.
Well, That's a nice steering wheel and column for sure.
And
so
then,
you got the B&M shifter on your 400?
Yep, I got the B&M shifter for the Turbo 400, and then the nice thing about the B&M shifters is even when you change your transmissions, there's a lot of options and availability of parts for these. So when I went from the 700R4, which is a 4-speed, to the Turbo 400, it was very easy to swap the gear indicators and to change the linkage to match without having to change the whole shifter, which saved a lot of time. And it got me on the road quickly.
So you got twin sticks on your Dana 300 there.
Yep, so those are made by Double D Fabrication. I don't remember exactly where he's based out of, but I do love those shifters. The only downside to those is when you go with a twin stick rather than a single stick on a Dana 300, you get kind of a rough action, and so you'll find yourself where you're having to put it in reverse and then rev it a little bit, and just to get those gears to mesh just right, or even put it in neutral and just let it roll back a little bit, and then you can shove it into gear. But if you're just going to sit there in place and try, you're going to sit there and fight and scream.
Well, I see something that a 1980 CJ didn't come with that I'm aware of. Cup holders. That's a necessity for modern day.
It absolutely is. So those are actually, I think that's a Smitty built setup. I would really like to get one of the original Tuffy boxes, but they're kind of difficult to get a hold of right now in the market. And the people who do have them are asking ridiculous money. And while we're on the topic of that center console, I've been chasing this rattle for the past 6 months, and I cannot find out what it is. So this week, I'm going to be pulling that whole center console out and driving around to see if it stops. But I do have the radio hidden in there. And then I have a Rockford Fosgate amplifier in here as well.
Okay, so sound system in this thing.
Absolutely, yep.
So as far as your seats go, what kind of seats are these?
These are just Rugged Ridge cheapo seats. They've actually been in the Jeep since I first got it when I was 15. And in fact, I just noticed my first ever tear here. So soon I'm going to be looking for some Corbos. I've already got me a nice set of factory pedestals. So that way when I do it, I can have the pedestals ready to go. As soon as the seats come in, just swap them out, and I can put these on Facebook and easily sell them and keep me from too much downtime.
Oh, yeah, the Corbos are nice seats.
They are. They're really comfortable.
Nice. What kind of back seat you got? Is it the Rugged Ridge?
Yeah, that's just a Rugged Ridge, cheapo again, but not many people like to sit back there in the Jeep anyways. It's a little crowded, especially with the sound system and the subs. And the center console sitting further back for this B&M shifter.
So is this the factory 1980 roll bar?
No,
this is a YJ.
This is a YJ roll bar. It came from a 1995 Wrangler. And another thing is when we did the paint job, because it already had a Wrangler tub, we were able to keep a lot of these upgrades that came with the later model YJs. So I have the YJ roll bar, and I also have the YJ windshield frame here. The main modifications that we had to make that setup work was actually just cutting the hole for the center, for the vent, for the cowl. We cut that hole in there, and then I made a block-off plate for the factory YJ linkage, and that way you can still get your air coming through like a factory CJ. And then also you have the better bushings and better linkage from a Wrangler.
Okay. Quite a few upgrades.
Yeah. Little things here and there, but they make a lot of difference added together.
So I see that you Linux the tub. Did you do that, or did you pay somebody to...
So that was done at the shop. I did all the prep work for it, and then I actually bought the body man lunch. And he sprayed it for me.
Can't beat that then.
Exactly. So it just cost me supplies and the time and effort to just sit there and scruff it, which I didn't mind, because that way you're guaranteeing, you know, I know that there's no rust under there because I did it myself. You're not trusting someone else that they've done a good job.
That's true. So now that we're on the inside and we're about to, transition out, I'll ask you, is there anything you'd like to do besides the Corbos? I know you mentioned that.
Yep.
Any future upgrades on the interior of this Jeep?
On the interior, not much that I can think of. The only thing that really, like I said, really bugs me is that center console rattle. I've been chasing it for so long. I'd love, if it turns out to be that center console, I'd love to find a real Tuffy and put that in there and just make that a permanent solution. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with the interior the way it is. And I don't really get any leaks out of the top either. So that's pretty rare for a CJ.
So I know you mentioned earlier that you got some subs in the back. You mind showing that to us?
Absolutely. So that's a Q-bomb housing. And there's my Colgate toothpaste. And these are two 10-inch Rockford Fosgates. Just entry-level subs. I think I paid $60 a piece for them on Amazon. But they do definitely thump. That's another thing now that you ask me and I'm back here, I'm thinking about it. I'd like to put something just to insulate the bottom of this subwoofer box, just to keep it, because when I go over big speed bumps and stuff, I'll hear a loud smack because it's not really tied down. It's just my laziness.
Well, let's go ahead and transition back to the outside. What kind of lighting you got on this thing?
As far as lighting, these are actually, I believe, just Amazon special LED lights. I think they're actually for a TJ. But it was very similar to wire them in. Only difference is instead of a 3-wire setup, your ground is just going right to the tub. And the way I did that is I just popped the housing open and removed one of the mounting screws to the body and ran the ground to that, and then just changed the factory connectors over, so it's a plug-and-play setup that way.
So what kind of headlights you got on the front?
The headlights are actually one of my favorite upgrades that I've done to this thing because I live out in Lake Helen, and where I live, we're kind of on the end of a very long road, and there's no street lights at all. So the factory CJ lights were just not cutting it for me.
2 candles in the wind.
Yeah, exactly, and it was just ridiculous, especially being that the reason this was painted is because I had a deer jump out in front of me.
Oh.
I didn't want that to happen again, so my main thing was visibility there. So those are actually Morimoto, they're sealed beam headlights. They're not the crazy expensive ones, but they are still kind of expensive. I think they were about $380 a piece, but they do make a night and day, literally, that's cheesy, but night and day difference when you're driving down the road. And then obviously they don't make these smoked lenses, so I just literally took the time to just tape this off and then lightly sandblast the outside of these to etch it, and then just put some satin black paint on there. And same deal with the headlight rings. Just found a set at the shop that were a bit too far gone for us to reuse and painted them.
What kind of lights are on the front bumper here?
I actually don't know because those were gifted to me by a friend of mine, and I just have not had the chance to hook them up. I just threw them on there, and then other things caught my attention.
When the headlights are that good, you don't even need them.
Exactly. I'm kind of thinking of taking them off. But the headlights are an awesome upgrade. I love them.
So back to the body. What kind of front bumper and rear bumper are you running on this?
So the front bumper is a body armor 4x4. I don't know that they're in business anymore. I think they actually got into some legal issues with the company that originally had a license to produce them. But it is an awesome bumper. It's nice and heavy duty. I don't have any worries about hooking, a strap to it. Not worried about it coming apart. Nice thick steel.
Yeah.
So I love that thing.
What about the rear?
And then on the rear is actually welded in solid to the frame. A lot of people don't like that, but I do, just because not only do I have a hitch here that's welded in, but I have a lot more structural integrity holding the frame together. Before I got this, I know who did the repair mark. His name's Billy Moore, and that's his logo there. He actually boxed in the back of the frame because, as you know, these Jeeps are quite prone to having rust problems, especially in the back sections of the frames, and especially in the front as well with the steering mounts, which is not a good place to be rusting.
All right, Taylor, so I see that you've got a soft top on this. Is a soft top your only option, or are you considering a hard top, or what?
No, I actually do have a factory hard top at the house. I went through basically a whole restoration process on that. I drilled all the rivets out, put it all back together. I actually cut all the pocket nuts out of that thing and made brand new pocket nuts at the shop and actually fiberglassed it all back together. It came out absolutely perfect, and I spent about 3 months of my time on it, and I've never once put it on the Jeep.
Oh, really?
Yep, so if anybody's looking for a hardtop, you let me know, because the thing is absolutely mint, and even the shocks work that lift the tailgate strut up.
Yeah, that's
But I love the soft top in Florida, and it's nice, especially with how the weather is here. You can quickly take it down, enjoy your day. The weather will change like a light switch, and then you can quickly put it back on within 5 minutes. You're not sitting there fighting a heavy top.
Yeah. So do you ever run a bikini top or anything else?
I do, yeah. I was actually planning on running one today, but the weather's kind of threatening, so I decided
the weather
to
is
keep
kind
it
of
on.
questionable. And if you're wondering, we're at the beach, but the beach is closed right now. The tide's way too high.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
usually
there's a
I
lot
try
of
to
beach
do
room.
these interviews on the beach, but making the best out of what we've got. So next thing, how much do you drive this on a per year basis?
I am that one crazy guy that daily drives a CJ7. And
Yeah,
not only do I daily drive a CJ7, I don't do it in town. I actually take this thing about 40 miles down I-4 every single day. I've had my share of close calls, but every single time it's not only kind of humbling, but also keeps you on your feet. You're still driving a classic, and none of those upgrades change that.
Yeah, no ABS.
No ABS, and these are the things that they do make a big difference.
No
But
traction control.
Nothing, none of that.
Just you and the steering wheel and gas pedal.
Absolutely, and the main thing is just being aware of that. If you're aware of what you're driving, you'll be okay. Give people space. Be aware of how long it takes you to stop. Things like that. It's great fun at a light when you go and launch, but you have to make sure you're going to be able to stop.
That's very true. So I know we talked about the interior upgrades on the interior, but what about the exterior? You have future upgrades you'd like to do on the exterior of this
So
Jeep?
I'm actually pretty happy with the exterior. The only thing that I would like to do to it is I'd like to put some side steps on it. Just to help my poor girlfriend. She's 5'1", and she really struggles getting into it. But I do not like the aftermarket availability of the side steps right now. A lot of them are like the cheap tube fenders, and I see them rust out very quickly. So I'm planning on having a friend weld some up and put some on.
Okay. So that has been Taylor's 1980 CJ7. If you'd like to know anything more about it, be sure to leave a comment below. and him or I will try to answer. I'll try to answer it to the best of my ability, but I'm sure he'll check the comments from time to time.
Yep, and everyone's welcome to reach out to me. I'll help as much as I can.
So if you've got a cool CJ and you want to be on Civilian Jeeps, the YouTube channel here, just reach out to me, send me a direct message, maybe on Instagram at Civilian Jeeps, or send me a message through YouTube, or drop a comment below. I'd love to interview you just like we did Taylor. And you know, when it comes to Jeeps, keep it classy.